And we have our next keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Felicitas Macgilchrist. She is a full professor of digital education and schooling in Karl von Ossietzky University in Oldenburg in Germany. She's German and Scottish. She has done, she's hugely accomplished in the field. She's very widely published, and she is the lead editor of Learning Media and Technology, one of the lead editors along with Ben Williamson here, founder of Palgrave Studies in Educational Media. She's Vice Dean for Research in the School of Education and Social Science in Karl von Ossietzky University in Oldenburg. And she has been a leader in the field. I've heard her speak at Keynote at several conferences. She's in huge demand. And we've lured our other keynote speakers today with 2 hats, with DCU hats, branded merchandise. But for you, we have a hat. And I've forgotten it, so I'm going to send a message to the WhatsApp group, to the amazing student ambassadors. Please send in a hat surreptitiously to me. But she, as I say all of this, she has a great knowledge of research around the world. She's done projects on really interesting topics like critical utopia. The RED project she knows what's going on all around the different systems. The RED project, for example, is on AI. She worked with the top researchers in the world in South Africa and South America, in Sweden. So she has this really great bird's eye view of how education manifests in all these different countries. And she's in all of these, she's deeply embedded in all of these literatures and scholarship. You could talk to her hours about all this stuff. She's also a lovely, warm, bubbly person. And I'm saying all this to make her excited because she has a lovely Scottish accent as well. And when she gets excited, she speaks even faster. So we're going to have more words per book, right? As if you're an LLM, you know. And we could get you to speak really fast and bill you by the word. You know, you could bill us by the word. And if you met the learning outcome in the middle, we could just cut you off. We could perfectly optimize. You know, that's the future of education. As if you were an LLM, as if you're a piece of infrastructure, right? So I hope you're excited, because we're excited. And you're going to talk about all of this, about the affective nature of us as human beings and our excitement and what makes us human and what makes us real in this entangled infrastructure. So we would love to hear you speak. We're honored that you're here.
Well, not be me.
No, that's not you.
Thank you for the lovely introduction. What a wonderful introduction. And thank you for the invitation to be here, and thank you all for being up and awake in the morning after the conference dinner as well. Yeah. Thank you very much. Let's see. Yes, humans and infrastructure and fragility. That's the focus for today. My title, Fragile Generations, doesn't mean generations as in AI. I realised after I submitted it that might be taken to mean that. The title starts from something like this book, and especially from my infuriation with this book and my infuriation with the effects that this book has had. So Jonathan Haidt, in this book, The Anxious Generation, he shows a whole bunch of graphs. And here are some of them. And he connects them to this graph in particular and says that the increase in this one down here, no. Right. The increase in this one here is caused by the increase in the other ones. No, the other way around. The increase in depression, anxiety, mental illness, self-harm is caused by the introduction and the use of smartphones. The grey bit in each one is the same time period. Apparently, this book was very influential in Australia and led to their introduction to the age-related restrictions on using social media. Restrictions that are now being discussed in lots of other countries around the world. And Ben Williamson mentioned yesterday, and the discussion afterwards, Jared Horvath's book, The Digital Delusion, which does the same sort of thing for schools. There's a bunch of other books coming out which do similar things like this. Now, critical scholars of educational technology have been critiquing the manipulative design, the extractivism, the human planetary exploitation involved in digital technologies for years. Many people are really feeling pressures, anxiety, things like that. There was a great session on digital wellbeing yesterday, which pointed out some of these issues and talked about the mental health issues experienced these days. But the research does not support, the research which has been done on these kinds of issues does not support Hyde's suggestion that digital technologies are rewiring our children's brains and causing an epidemic of mental illness. This causing in the subtitle is the problem. So the problem is, if we assume this, if we think technologies are causing anxiety, then if we remove the technology, we remove the anxiety. And then young people can go back to being, he sort of implies in this book, the sort of resilient, robust, strong, stable personalities that they really should be or that they really are. So it's a simple technical solution to a complex social problem. And technical solutions don't have a very good track record of dealing very well with social problems. So what else might explain what's going on? And this is what I want to talk about today. It's not solutions. There was a request yesterday for solutions. I'm not going to talk about solutions, but I am going to talk about the implications of this sort of understanding of humans for our work with educational technologies. So I began really rethinking this question of anxiety more than just a sort of general annoyance with this sort of book when I heard Ash Sakar talking on BBC Question Time, or I saw a snippet on Instagram. Someone in the audience was talking about asking ChatGPT for help with his chats in his dating app. So he didn't feel that he could do it himself. He asked ChatGPT and got the hints and used that in the chat in the dating app with his potential date. And Sakar, she said, rather than AI being able to enhance human innovation or critical thinking, it's being used to exploit our insecurities. And there's a huge difference between causing anxiety or causing insecurities and exploiting insecurities. So in Sakar's view, and what she's saying here, the insecurities are something which we already have. And the AI technologies address us as insecure and exacerbate just those feelings, and they extract value as a result. So in the sense of, you're not creative enough, you're not funny enough, you're not witty enough, you're not clever enough, never mind, I can do it better for you. I can be funnier, I can be wittier, I can be cleverer, I can be the perfect date or whatever. So this is the first who of EdTech from the conference theme is these sort of CEOs and CTOs and designers and developers who notice this and then shrug and say, well, there's nothing we can do about it, or that hire more neuroscientists to exploit these sort of insecurities. And Ben and Abibi talked about this yesterday, so I'm not really going to go there. Instead, I started reading more about fragility and seeing it across a host of different research fields. And that's where I want to take you with me today, this journey through the concept of fragility, which is not a pejorative word, right? And to explore the idea of fragility as a fundamental human condition, not an effect, not something that's caused by any specific media or political events or interpersonal relations, but this idea of fragility as a fundamental human condition and what that means for designing and deploying educational technologies. So I'm going to take 3 further steps after outlining the problem, which I've just done, looking at fragility, the concept. Is it not something that we can overcome and become more resilient? Then infrastructure. I've talked about EdTech as infrastructures of feeling in the title. So what do I mean when I say EdTech has become infrastructural, and how is fragility or feelings relevant to that? And then the third part has more concrete examples from educational technology. It's going to take me a while to get there, but I will get there in the end. And I'll close with some questions of what is to be done. It's very short, that bit. So fragility, why fragility? I want to briefly talk about 3 different approaches with these 3 books as illustrative of what's happening. Marie Routy, she was one of the best sort of translators of Jacques Lacan's psychoanalytic thought. She begins this book by writing, "We live in a world of fragile things, fragile selves, fragile psyches, fragile loves. One of the most distinctive features of human existence, what makes it recognizable as human and what gives it its characteristically bittersweet quality, is that we tend to be acutely aware of this precariousness, even when we're more or less courageously focused on taking advantage of the various opportunities it affords." Maybe that's the courageous part you said earlier. So for Ruti, psychoanalysis is a cultural theory. I'm not going to go into psychoanalysis too much, but it's a cultural theory of what it means to be human. It can tell us about the existential strategies that we develop and mobilize to engage with this idea of fragility. She suggests that the question of how we should proceed with our lives is something that we often wonder about in our daily lives, in the background, or that we struggle with. And we spend time thinking about how we want to live, what's meaningful us, how we want to spend our time. In an educational context, we can add that questions about how we want to teach or learn or design learning technologies and interventions revolve around these questions. How do we want to shape educational practices so they feel valuable, so they feel meaningful? And as you all know in this room, the question of technology in education is always also a question of norms and values and which we can implement. So the world is full of fragile things because life is uncertain and unpredictable. Unscripted futures, as Lisa Looney just said. Learning analytics and things have often offered us ways, they offer us predictions with the promise that we can control the future. But since we know that these are based on data from the past, we know they can't really increase our capacity to control the future in any way. So from Ruti's perspective, instead of trying to overcome fragility, the best thing that we as educators, designers, technologists, students, whatever, can do for our well-being is to learn to expect unpredictability and the existential insecurity that exceeds our control. So exploring fragility is an invitation to consider what could happen if she says, if we move from the pursuit of stability to an acceptance of and tolerance for instability, if we embrace the precarious world around us. And this completely maps to important strains of educational theory, where uncertainty and risk and struggle are at the heart of the educational experience. So, but fragility also turns up in other subdisciplines and disciplines. In democratic theory, William Connolly has written about the broader ecologies that constitute our world. And in this book, he reflects on the relation of late capitalism to the planet. And he's considering what we can do today in a world that is very fragile. He wants us to attend relentlessly, more relentlessly than we have in the past, to precariousness and to fragility. He uses a bit of speculative realism, a lot of democratic theory, left-oriented radical democracy, and he wants to extend our political sensibilities. He wants us to join attention to different degrees of creativity in the domains of human culture, of non-human force fields, and the culture-nature imbrications. Join that to a critical account of the expansion, the intensification, and the acceleration of neoliberal capitalism. And then we will be brought face to face with the fragility of things today, he says. Neoliberalism, he says, makes demands on humans and the planet which they cannot possibly meet. So neoliberalism fails to address the fragilities that it exacerbates. He says, he doesn't specify who he means with we, but if we attend to the fragility of things today, this attention might make us more sensitive to the dangers facing institutions, might help us shape a more militant democratic politics. And what he suggests is, I think, also eminently relevant for our everyday work in educational institutions, more militant democratic pedagogies. The book's from 2013, and it sounds almost quaint today to be talking about neoliberalism when we're actually facing more like an authoritarianism. But I think today's politics actually might make his argument about attending to the fragility of things and weaving in more democratic, more militant democracy actually even more relevant. So, not yet. Ruti attends to the psyche and our social relationships, and Connolly to planetary dimensions and democratic activism, and Remedios Zafra, a theorist of digital culture, she explores our post-pandemic networked practices. Fragile is the title of this book, and the subtitle is Letters on Anxiety and Hope in the New Culture. And I have to admit, I only read this in a machine-translated version, so I hope that I got the main points and I'm talking about what she actually talks about. The book is a critique of the levels of productivity expected of us in labour contexts today, and especially the levels of self-exploitation that go on for people in knowledge work and in creative work, like academia, like journalism, like education, design, activism as well. The fragility she's referring to moves between the pressures created created by, she calls them hypnotic work routines, emails and emails and ever more emails and emails and reports and meetings and this sort of thing. And feelings of stress or anxiety or vulnerability and the planetary dimensions of becoming aware of human fragility. So she suggests that many of us, people in knowledge work, people in creative work in Europe, she's talking about Europe, have been socialized to submit to the pressures of work. And this means, she says, many of us feel like we're living a life that doesn't belong to us. So knowledge workers, creative workers who show themselves constantly online in different network spaces feel fragile when they expose themselves like this. And it's as if our aspirations and desires are out of step with what's expected of us. And this maybe links to Rose Baker's comments yesterday in the GASTA about teacher burnout. It resonated for me there. So with these three books, they just offer a glimpse of recent theorizing on fragility. Also often refer to anxiety. And what I take from all these books is they're very different from Hyde's notion of anxiety being caused by network devices. If anxiety were caused by something specific, then dealing with that specific thing would get rid of the anxiety or the fragility. And it's also Nassim Nicholas Taleb of Black Swans. He said in his, he's got a book, Anti-Fragile, and for him, fragility is a problem we need to overcome. He talks about the fragilistas in universities, and he wants the sissies and suckers. He actually uses those words in his book, sissies and suckers of our world to toughen up and become anti-fragile. So for the thinkers that I'm orienting to here, that would be a denial of our fundamental human, social and planetary conditions. Fragility is not something we can overcome. It's something to which we can fashion a relationship. And Zafra puts the relational dimension best, I think, in this part. In the fragility that this awareness awakens, she says, there's a temptation to seek refuge in the cocoon of the connected room, wrapped in stimuli and screens, to avoid touching or being touched, falling or having something fall on you, infecting or being infected. But it's sociality that makes life human, a sociality of fragile, interconnected bodies that fall ill or suffer and need the hand and support of another. And this bit especially, it's in the shared need for others that fragility becomes a communal bond, in the acknowledged vulnerability that compels the individual to slow down and lean on those nearby. So, and I'll come back to this idea of fragility with infrastructure in a minute, but I need to say something first about infrastructure in general. So infrastructure. Eamon mentioned the RED project, and one of my colleagues in the project, Tom Hillman, he often showed images like these, and he said, oh, does digitalization in education look like this? Or does it look like this? And in education research, we talk a lot more about the first set of images than we talk about the second set of images. But the second is also crucial if we're thinking about the cultural politics of EdTech, what it does. Following scholars in anthropology and science and technology studies who assume that infrastructure, also this bit here, is eminently political. And this is one of my favourite quotes from Susan Lee Starr. Study a city and neglect its sewers and power supplies, and you miss essential aspects of distributional justice and planning power. Study an information system and neglect its standards, wires and settings, and you miss equally essential aspects of aesthetics, justice and change. Perhaps if we stopped thinking of computers as information highways and began to think of them more modestly as symbolic sewers, this realm would open up a little bit. And that's supposed to be a picture of a sewer back there. And I like the image of EdTech as symbolic sewers. It's not only the standards and the wires and the settings and the underwater cables that are key to aesthetics, justice and change. Infrastructure is a relational concept. Something becomes infrastructural in relation to practices. And so Ines Dussel and Pato Ferranti have argued that YouTube has become a knowledge infrastructure because it's used so much in schools. YouTube participates in shaping educational content. It co-defines what counts as knowledge. It contributes to the ways in which knowledge is organized, is hierarchized, and is circulated. But infrastructure is also fragile. Ooh, that's okay. The title of the book at the top is Fragile. These scholars from science and technology studies, similar to Ruti and Connolly and Zafra, although none of these scholars refer to each other in their work, they also argue that fragility is an inescapable condition of life on this planet, from bridges and timber plantations to interpersonal relationships and the retreat of glaciers. They're talking about all this sort of stuff. The key for our work in educational technology for me is their attention to maintenance and repair, what you can see at the top of the screen. Maintenance and repair as a form of care. And so thinking about maintenance highlights that fragility is not a stable state. Fernando Dominguez Rubio and the others here, they have wonderful examples in this book that illustrate the relationality of infrastructure and fragility. One of the things is paper. They mention paper and they say, if you put it outdoors and you just leave it outside, it will take a few days for it to crumble and fall away. But if you store it in a controlled environment at 35 degrees centigrade and 80% relative humidity, RH, relative humidity, it could last for about 3 years. If you store it at 20 degrees and 50%, it could last about a century. And if you store it at 10 degrees and 40%, it could last 1,200 years. They say making our humble piece of paper as solid and reliable as iron or stone, if not more so. So the piece of paper hasn't changed at all, but the conditions in which it's stored make it more or less fragile. And this is absolutely central to the concept. Nothing is just fragile by itself. Everything is rendered fragile by something else or in reference to something else. So fragility is not evenly dispersed. It's a matter of inequitable conditions as well. So that also adds an important nuance to the idea of fragility as a fundamental human condition that Ruchi and Connolly and Zafar were talking about. It's not that all of us are constantly feeling fragile, but instead that we can all be rendered fragile by something or someone else, or by reference to something or someone else. So there's an inequitable distribution of fragility. Some of us are rendered more fragile, more precarious, more often than others. Judith Butler and others have written a lot about precarity in that. And now I'm going to get more closely to actual education and technology now. Who's rendered fragile when using EdTech is shown marvellously by Lucas Cohn in one of his ethnographic scenes. It's primary school, but I think it's relevant for all ages. It's maybe more excessive than we would see at universities, but maybe you can feel a resonance from different settings that you're in. It's very long. My background is also in ethnography, and I really love doing ethnographic work, but sometimes it's hard in a talk to explain, to share ethnography, because you need to, it's about the scenes and things, right? So I'm going to read a really long scene just now, and I hope you can just close your eyes and imagine the scene. These are the key characters in the scene. So you're in Denmark, and it's primary 2, elementary 2. Ahmed is the teacher. And he says, all right, everyone, put your headphones on and get to it. Let's do 20 minutes, he says. And he activates a digital timer on the wall, like I have in front of me here. It's Wednesday, the last lesson before lunch, which means that the students in 2A are to practice solving mathematical problems in MathFessor, the online platform now open on all the students' computers. I is Lucas Cohn, obviously. Here, his name down there. I'm pressed in between Kamran and Elizabeth on a stool that was probably never intended for anyone older than 10, gauging their screens as they log into the programme. A dashboard opens, showing a number of points and medals that the students have gathered from previous math lessons. Elizabeth is quick to press the launch button on her, which directs her to the exercise of the day, 20 mathematical problems focusing on addition and subtraction. While Elizabeth begins counting on her fingers, Kamran has accidentally closed the browser on his computer and is trying to enter his login information on the platform. It takes another 4 minutes before he manages to launch the exercise and opens the first problem. 3 + 6 = space. Directly across from us, Emily has taken off her headphone and is bouncing her feet on the floor. She asks Ahmed if she can go to the restroom. Ahmed, scampering around the room to help the students open the programme, nods as he walks over to check on Kamran, who is stuck with his first problem. 3 + 6, that's 9. You know that, Kamran, right? Kamran bites his teeth together as he nods and enters the answer into the programme. A new line of numbers appears on his screen. 2 + 6 = space. While Kamran stares at the second equation, Maya, who's sitting in the front row of the classroom, exclaims that she's won a silver medal, indicating that she has solved all 20 equations. Raising her eyebrows, Elizabeth pulls down her headphones and places them on her neck. Maya, some of us are still working, so stop giving me a headache. And Lucas Cohn interjects, he says, giving me a headache is the phrase that they often use when something annoys them or disturbs them. So Maya turns her head and sticks out her tongue, looking at Elizabeth. Ahmed raises his voice and tells Maya to stop, recommending that she should try to earn another medal. Shitty, Elizabeth says in a low voice. putting her headphones back on as Ahmed rushes across the room to help Emily log onto her math professor profile after returning from the bathrooms. To my right, at the far end of the table, Mark and Jasper have taken off their headphones, raising their hands to indicate they want to use the restroom together. One at a time, Ahmed shouts back, but both get up and head for the door, dragging their feet along the grey linoleum floor in a zombie-like manner. As they pass behind us, Jasper stops and stretches his arm, pointing at Cameron's computer. Cameron's only at number 2, he says. That's why he doesn't have any medals. Mark laughs, and Ahmed rushes over to the door, telling Jasper and Mark in a loud voice to come with him right now. I lean forward to comfort Cameron as he continues to stare soundlessly at the equation and progress bar on his screen, indicating that he has to solve 18 problems to earn a medal. The timer counting down on the whiteboard shows 13 minutes and 11 seconds. So I need a break. I hope that was visible enough. And so Cohen's analysis goes somewhere else with that in this article, which is a very good article. But for me, I want to show with this scene the range of affective work that's happening in here. The maths platform has become infrastructural. Maths, this is just the way the class does maths. This is their infrastructure. For Maya, Math Fest is exciting and it's energizing. She wins, she celebrates. Elizabeth is annoyed with Maya, but her shitty suggests that she's also annoyed with herself for not being faster or not being better. Cameron bites his teeth together, so there's a frustration going on here. And towards the end, Jasper and Mark, they laugh loudly at Cameron, where everyone else can hear as well, who the ethnographer then feels needs comforting. Of the students that Cohen describes here, Elizabeth and Cameron are shown in different kinds of fragility. Elizabeth seems to feel she should be as good or as fast as Maya. The platform addresses her as potentially excellent, potentially a winner, potentially really good, but just not quite good enough, not fast enough. Cameron seems much more stuck, and his stuckness is flagged out loud in front of the whole class by the other 2 boys who walk past. So it's not just the platform itself which is addressing Cameron as not good enough. It's the use of this platform on a computer screen so the other 2 can see directly onto a screen as they walk past. And we've got a classroom where kids are constantly walking around and moving around, going to and from restrooms so they can see each other's work. That makes Cameron into someone who seems to need reassurance then by the ethnographer. So I think if we slow down in our everyday work and think about classrooms or lab spaces or lecture halls or wherever we work. Maybe some of you can also think of other moments where some people have been rendered fragile in reference to EdTech more than others, and all different ways, not just classic intersectional dimensions of inequality, but also the other ways that you've been addressed or people have been addressed. And I want to mention one more example because generative AI is so central to all the debates and discussions in education at the moment. We were talking about, we were talking about ChatGPT and all that sort of thing at the university, and a student, I'll call her Susan, she doesn't actually want to use generative AI, but she wonders if she'll be at a disadvantage if she doesn't. She says to us, if she reads the assigned text twice for a class so she can understand it, while other students just upload it and have their favourite automated assistant generate a summary, then they'll make better progress with all the other things that they have to do, and they'll give better, clear answers in the seminar. So Suzanne feels she isn't good enough, she isn't fast enough, she isn't clever enough. The chatbot seems to be able to do it better, faster, more cleverly than she can herself. And that reminds me of this quote again. It goes to the heart of how AI assistants operate. They tell us we are not quite clever enough, fast enough, good enough, witty enough, whatever. So even if technology is designed to do epistemic work, to help learn maths, to help with university activities, it's also doing effective work. The systems address us as people with insecurities, and they exploit and exacerbate those insecurities, even if they don't intend to, even if that's not the intention. And a few scholars have been thinking about the feelings and the emotions and effects involved in infrastructures for education. I've cited some of them up here. So these technologies, these tools are infrastructures of feeling because they act on us. They're part of the social, the material, the political forces that act on us as teachers, as learners, to co-produce and to shape experiences that then feel intensely personal, intensely individual and emotional, like sadness or anger or joy or rebellion or fear or more. So if you agree, look at the time, if you agree that the design of many corporate technologies used in education exploits people's fears and insecurities, even if it isn't intended that way, what can we do about it? And I want to turn to Ruth Gilmore, the abolitionist geographer, who argued that there's a second way in which infrastructure and affect are connected, when feeling itself becomes infrastructural. Gilmore talks about infrastructures of feeling to capture this. So there are studies on how EdTech is deployed that pay close attention to who is doing what to embed these technologies in everyday practices of care. Practices that are often not seen and not talked about and not considered important, but these are the effective practices that become infrastructure themselves. They're a form of rebellion, a joyful resistance against exploitative technologies and for a more liberatory kind of education. The Zine workshop yesterday, the AI resist list, the Library of Babel, is maybe also kind of infrastructures of feeling. But also, I want to talk more about the banal, everyday things in classrooms. We have a book where we wrote a lot about ethnography in classrooms, and we have some things in there about care. And I want to share one example from this ethnographic work in Germany. So we've got a teacher here, the characters again. We've got a teacher, Carla, and we've got a student called Noah. It's only a short example this time. So Noah wanted to create a quiz, a Kahoot, for his science presentation. The school's in Germany and the science class is in German, so he prepared his presentation and the quiz in German. And Carla told us how the quiz took on a life of its own. He sent her his draft, and she corrected it and sent it back to him. He made his changes. He sent it back to her. She corrected it again, sent it back to him like 5 times, she told us, backwards and forwards. It was madness, she said. There were wrong words, there were nonsense words, and words were missing. And then someone told her this was happening because the Kahoot app is programmed in English, and it was auto-correcting Noah's German incorrectly into nonsense English words or nonsense words. So she said in this part of when she was telling us about this, well, he's super. He always wants to do everything correctly, and he's very enthusiastic, right? But until I understood, I was wondering, why on earth has he got this mistake in there again? And it wasn't him. She said, it wasn't him. It was because of the program and the app. And for me, this scene illustrates how feelings themselves become infrastructural and how to deal with EdTech. Carla's sense of Noah's ability has been made wobbly by this interaction. He's usually a really good student. She has a lot of faith in him as a student, wanting to do things right. So why is his work full of mistakes again and again and again? The scene shows Carla putting in a lot of work behind the scenes, together with Noah and his work on the app. And this other person who's also a student who explained to her that it's not Noah's fault, but it's the technical settings that are creating these mistakes. So her feeling that Noah is a good student who wants to do everything well is what propels her actions to how she's acting in here. So the feelings become the infrastructure. And Ruth Gilmore says, just as in the material world, infrastructure underlies productivity, speeds up some processes, slows down others, sets agendas, enables cooperation. So the infrastructure of feeling is also material in the sense that the actions that feelings enable or constrain become material in this Kahoot quiz. For me, the end of the story with Carla was so important because she sounded so relieved and so pleased that her sort of feeling towards Noah wasn't wrong. It was this socio-technical configuration that made things fragile. So her feelings about her students, about her job, they became the infrastructure that enabled the learning to take place. In the book, we talk about this kind of thing as maintenance work, the maintenance work that educators do all the time to keep the EdTech working, to keep the social relationships working, to keep the pedagogies working in precarious relations of care and learning and teaching. And since care work often goes unseen and unrecognised, there's an element of resistance and militancy in paying attention to these infrastructures of feeling. Okay, so closing. What does this sense of fragility add to our understanding of EdTech and to maybe, I don't know, a justice-oriented kind of pedagogy for the future with technologies? So if we agree that technology is not the cause of fragility, fragility is already there, it's a fundamental human condition, what does this approach imply for working with EdTech? The 3 things I want to suggest. First, fragility is a sensitizing concept. It operates as a provocation to think beyond epistemic practices or knowledge infrastructures, which we talk about a lot more in educational spaces, to pay more attention to the effective work being done with infrastructure, or moments in which feelings become infrastructural and can support things we want to do. Secondly, though, that's sort of as an analytical concept then. Secondly, fragility as a way to flag something that's happening in our world today, something about the social context of educating today. Raymond Williams argued that structures of feeling emerge when the prevailing ideology, he says, is beginning to change into a new one. And for Gilmore, it's infrastructures of feeling that appear when there's some sort of old ideology is on its way out, but a new ideology hasn't quite solidified yet. And that's what they say in the STS book that I mentioned earlier. Fragility is a word for these times. It says something about our time today. A tenuous counter-proposal to the obsessions for robustness or dramatic disruption or apocalyptic catastrophe, and a companion to repair, maintenance and care. So it's a counter-proposal to the notion of an anxious generation, some sort of crisis, which assumes that we can overcome the fragility and get back to some sort of normal, robust sense of how humans really should be. And if fragility is not a pejorative word, then it's a concept that invites practitioners to have conversations about, conversations about infrastructures of feeling, so that maybe designers can design educational technologies differently with a view to the feelings and the emotions and the affect which are going to be entangled with it. It means educators deploy EdTech differently with an attention to the feelings that are happening for different students. And users refashion our relationships to EdTech, to one another, with a view to what Zafra called the communal bond, where acknowledging fragility and expecting fragility invites us to slow down and lean on one another. And I know that many people in this room are doing all those things already. You're finding workarounds. You're doing the care maintenance work. You're developing small tech or communitarian EdTech interventions. You're researching these issues. And one part of me recognises this is the central work leading to change. It's the quotidian, the minor, the affective work that leads to massive change, but slowly as the infrastructures of feeling push out the prevailing ideology and new ones struggle to be born. Sean Burns said something similar about UDL yesterday in the GASTA. It's the small practices that can lead to major changes. Another part of me thinks we need to seize the means of production and collectivize everything. But with that, thank you for your attention. Is
it on? Okay, thank you very much, Felicitas, for that wonderful, amazing presentation. And you ended on an invitation to conversation, so that's where we're going next. And I wish I had the incredible ability to juggle so many ideas and thoughts and theories so masterfully as Professor Dr. Macgilchrist, the unique facility to do that. So all I can say is mind blown emoji. So we're going to ask you guys, and one more thing to say, just to steal another second, is it was so lovely to see so much of the student experience centered and so much of their voice. So thank you deeply for that. Okay, so we'll take questions, please. Ellen. So Rob is telling me to speak into the microphone, please.
Thanks. So thank you so much for that. That was really interesting. But I just wanted to ask, I agree with you that it's not necessarily the technology, but maybe the exploitative nature of, kind of things that are existing there. But when you mentioned at the end about the relationship maybe with EdTech developers, and it just kind of struck me that the technology does exploit existing vulnerabilities, but the more it's kind of exploited, I can feel like the more we kind of shape our behavior to nearly be exploited. Because I think, we talk a lot about AI and, how it can make us more kind of productive, but there actually is no kind of link between how productive you are and how much you get paid. Like, that link has been broken since the 60s. So the idea that, you're going to have more time to do more creative things or to have a work-life balance, it's not really realistic. But because I've kind of noticed in my own work that there's more of a push towards work being more quantifiable, and that kind of puts your workload up. But then I kind of noticed that I'm sort of changing the way I work to be more easily quantified, so that things like more engagements rather than maybe more meaningful engagements, and how many people you met and things like that. So I just want to, I don't know how clear that question is, but just a little bit more about the relationship between how the technology exploits us, but then how we shape our behavior nearly to meet that exploitation.
Yes, thank you for that. The book Remedia Safra, she talks about exactly that sort of thing, like how it's not a linear causal relationship that technology leads to this. It's this social, economic, political context in which we find ourselves, which invites us to do some of that ourselves, and then to have a relationship to technologies which strengthens that sort of thing. And I don't know if it's going in the same direction, but Brandenburg is one of the federal states in Germany where the promise of technology, the promise of EdTech is almost always it will save you time so you can free up to do the more important things. And there's a whole bunch of things to say about that. I interrupt myself first. There's Neil Selwyn has one example in a book where he interviews a teacher, and they're talking about surveillance, what's it called, facial recognition technology, where it's supposed to take off the pressure on teachers to do the attendance in the morning. You can go straight into your thing. And the teachers are like, no, at that minute of taking attendance, that's when I check in with every single child and see, are you okay? Where are you today? So that's like undermines what pedagogical things are happening in these apparently technical moments. So that's one thing. The other thing is Brandenburg, one of the German federal states, they said recently, the promise of more time for more important things when you use technology. As one of a whole bunch of measures they have introduced, AI is one of these measures, which means teachers have more time, which means they can now teach 1 more hour a week. But Safra talks a lot more in her book about how we do it to ourselves. She has another book about enthusiasm. Right? Enthusiasm is what makes us exploitable. But you want to have enthusiasm for your work, but that's what makes you exploitable, makes you exploit yourself. I'm not sure if that goes in the same direction as what you're thinking. And we do what's expected of us and create situations which make the work overload more and more, and not the meaningful things. That's, for me, that's what this idea of fragility gives us, is a concept for thinking about or remembering what's meaningful and why do we do all this stuff in the first place.
Sure.
Thanks a lot for this super interesting talk. I was just thinking about the concept of fragility in education more broadly, or even before technologies were inserted in the classroom, which has obviously already been a long time. But I was just thinking about, during your talk, I was just thinking about my own primary education experience, and especially with the ethnography back home. I was just thinking, I think when I was in primary school, I've also experienced some kind of fragility when there wasn't any tech. For example, with children around me that were also done before I was done with an assignment. So in what way is technology now making us think about fragility in education more broadly, is it in a way a good thing? Because maybe now with EdTech integration in the classroom, we are maybe, we as researchers, I mean, more forced to think about fragilities that are already in education without tech, or yeah, I'm just thinking about the relation of fragility in education more broadly, and whether that was already, the concept of fragility was already being thought about in research before tech was integrated. That's basically my question.
Yeah, thank you. These authors, well, the first two, especially Ruti and Connolly, they don't really talk about technology at all. They're talking about it as a fundamental human condition that hasn't maybe been seen or talked about enough, but it was always there. It was there when you were at primary school. It was there when I was at primary school. I think I could remember also things myself as well, different situations being in. But it's like a concept to remind us not to think about toughening up. This anti-fragile book is just amazing to read. It's phenomenal. The sense of how humans are or should be in the anti-fragile book, robust and, just to use the word like fragilista as a critique does a whole bunch of work itself. So a fundamental human condition which is there. And then the question for me is, like you're saying yourself, what does technology make us more aware of? Not necessarily what does it change so much. We always have this expectation. We often have this expectation that technology must change something. Technology must transform. We talk about the digital transformation and stuff like this. And I think really often, if you look closely at what's happening, it doesn't necessarily transform stuff. It makes things more visible sometimes, which were already there, or it makes things invisible, which were previously visible. But it's not a linear change in a certain direction in many, many cases. And then maybe that's the point with the silver lining. And then we talked about it yesterday about generative AI as well. The silver lining is when you think, okay, it's just so much more obvious now that it makes us rethink what's really important, like generative AI in writing, right? So we can now, someone said this yesterday, sorry, I can't remember who it was or where it was, when it was. We always knew this generic academic voice was not great. And now we can really say, write in your own voice to students. So it just pushes something which is which we're already aware of in that sense. I'm not sure if I answered the question properly, but
Hi, thanks so much for your talk. Like, you've really got me thinking a lot. So it's like, I'm going to try and make sense of my question. So, I mean, even listening to you kind of remind me of Brené Brown and that notion of vulnerability and fragility, and that whole notion of, even as staff, like I support students with disabilities, and I suppose in the 40 minutes where I get to meet a student, that have never met me before, and in that time I've got to train them with a technology. I suppose I've had to realize that connecting with students in a short period of time is a challenge. Like, they're not used to just meeting a stranger who's a professional, trying to instill some kind of knowledge about a technology that's going to transform their learning in a 40 to 50 minutes stint. So that notion of, say, fragility or vulnerability, I've had to step my game up and, be aware of my own fragilities in order to have meaningful connection with a student with a disability. So I, declare my own disabilities to the student. And even though that has definitely changed the nature of the work I do with students and has opened up deeper and richer conversations with the students, I never thought that was actually going to be part of my job to, expose my own vulnerabilities, but it has been changed. And I'm just wondering, in the type of work that you do, does the nature of student staff relationships change, when we're talking about fragility and technology? Have other staff have to step up their game now in terms of the types of meaningful relationships they have with their students, as we're competing with, I suppose maybe technology just maybe numbing us a bit, or just maybe oversaturating us with information? How do we retain and step up to these kinds of new issues in society?
I think it's also a really important point, and I think I have two thoughts. I'll just agree with you and say yes. Maybe I have two thoughts extra. One is, the 3 books that I cited today, illustrative of these different approaches, all of them talk about slowing down in some way or other. And that's what you just mentioned just now as well, slowing down. And it takes a lot of privilege to be able to slow down to a certain extent. It's not everyone's able to slow down. This is what Paul Prinsloo in the Red Project South Africa would always say to me, slowing down is a really privileged thing when, when different contexts are needing to be faster to do different things or to install different things. But they have that idea of slowing down and thinking about what's meaningful. And one thing for me, I teach pre-service teachers, and there's still, and I felt it myself too, I'm not just saying they do, I felt it myself sometimes, if it's generative AI again, I'm sorry, but when you have a written piece written with assistant in some sort of automated assistant, then there's a temptation to think, oh, they're just being lazy or they're just making it easy for themselves. I've had students write reflections, they make it easy for themselves. And that's the opposite of thinking there's a fragility at the base for why someone might have used that. Not because they're lazy, not because they're cheating, but because they're feeling addressed in their insecurity and their fragility, and then acting from that because they're not sure of what else to do or whatever, those sort of things. And then I think the only thing, I've nothing to add to what you said, having a conversation about it, showing yourself, acknowledging this is effective work that we're doing. It's affective work, not effective work. It's also effective, but affective work. This is a work of feeling which is involved in what we do. And some people are happy to embrace that and go with that. And some people are thinking more, no, I have a rational, it's about knowledge practices and epistemic practice, and I don't want to go there. And then there's maybe just a thinking, what does it mean for you? Where do you position yourself in that? And how do you feel comfortable working or not working?
Important announcement. The award for the most tricked out laptop at EdTech 26 goes to Dr. Suzanne Stone. The award is sponsored by no one and the prize is nothing. But this, dear Felicitas, is for you. This is some stuff, as is customary now in the last 48 hours. You're getting your little DCU bag. And so but thank you so much for an amazing talk. It was absolutely wonderful. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. We're going to just take another few minutes of your time, folks, to do something very, very important. And we're going to invite Alison Egan and Martina Cretin up here to the lecture.